As a consequence, I lost my footing. Once the prof regained control, we had a short in-class essay assignment, and that was that. After the second day of class, the prof asked me to meet her in her office. "I read your essay," she said. I nodded. "I don't think you're going to be able to pass this class." I was confused. She explained that it was clear that I was someone who had difficulty with spelling and grammar to the point she recommended I drop the course. "Is this class required for your major?" she asked. "I'm a writing major," I said. That took her aback some. "Well," she said, doodling a note to herself, "I'm going to enroll you in a pre-comp, and then you can try again next semester." I shook my head because I had already completed a pre-comp class. Even more flustered, she recommended that I, at the very least, transfer to a different class, since I wasn't a real freshman anyway. I said that I would like that. My next class, I walked into a room full of freshman girls and a grad student prof. I was given a bunch of papers and a take-home essay assignment. On the class after we handed in our essays, the grad prof asked me to stay after. She asked me if English was my first language. I describe what I look like, but I don't need to do that. You see me. So basically, I've never been asked if English is my first language before. So I said yes. "Oh," she said. And then she let me go. That day I cried. And 2 weeks into school, I was way behind in every class. All those lit courses I signed up for had assigned readings that were stacking up. I had 4 books in my arms at all times, but at the speed I read, it didn't matter. Frankenstein, White Noise, Richard III, and Young weighed on me like bricks. My second writing assignment was coming up, tomorrow. Write your own Notes of a Native Son, at least 3 pages. I decided to ignore the prompt. If I was going to fail anyway, I'd fail with a shred of dignity instead of pandering to the busy work that tore my insides throughout my primary education experience. I wrote a 7-page story about making out with a couple of girls at some party, added apocalyptic undertones, rumors of mutated crocs in New Orleans eating the dead. I titled it Notes of a Native Son, S-U-N, but that son was a typo, but it worked out with the story. And I came into class at 10 a.m. without sleeping. A day later, I got an email from my prof asking if she could print copies of the story and hand them out to the class. I replied, sure, without thinking, and then I opened my story on my computer and wilted. There were errors that even I could notice, which was bad. I spent that evening trying to read for my lit class and imagining myself as a skewered pig. The next morning, I sat nervously in class, as the class silently read my piece. "What do you think?" asked the prof. "Dan, I'm going to ask you not to act. I'm going to ask you not to say anything." I nodded. "Well, it had a lot of errors," someone offered. My guts churned. Too much coffee, not enough sleep. "Did that get in the way of the story?" the prof asked. "A little bit," said another one of the girls. "And what did you think about the content?" said the professor. The rest of the class was a 40-minute session of 11 girls talking about how great I was, or rather how great my story was. Even better, I got an A in that class, and at the end of the semester I still couldn't spell. But I could read nearly as fast as a normal human being, and my writer's ego had been strengthened by non-stop praise from that grad prof. "I want to drop out," I told my dad as a joke. I'd gotten straight A's at Kutztown University, but I wasn't taking classes with huge reading loads. I was beat. "I don't have time to write. It doesn't make any sense. I'm going to school to be a writer, but they fill my days with so much fucking busy work." "Hey," my dad said. My dad still didn't approve of cursing, which is kind of cute. I guess the trauma of child rearing seems to make people care about these things. "Just stick it out another semester," he said. I did. The next semester I was finally allowed into a fiction class. I was learning basics, helpful, I have to admit. I wrote my 3rd fiction story in one night, no time, with myself as the main character. And as I worked, I realized it was about losing someone to suicide. My prof read it and said, "This feels like the first chapter of a novel." After that semester, I was already halfway done with college, a trap. "You're already halfway," my father said. How true. I wrote an 80-page screenplay over that summer. Over the summer. Yeah, there are errors in this, too. And wanted to stab my collaborator. But at least I got experience working on bigger plots. The problem was that our communication was bad, the collaborator and I's. I had written the outline of the story and developed the characters before he came on the scene, and I was particularly affectionate to the main character, Colin Hart. And when the collaborator wrote Colin saying and doing obscene or rude things that he would never do, I couldn't help but want to stab the fucker. So maybe that isn't exactly a communication problem, but either way, in the end, we each took our versions of the screenplay and partied. Both of us feeling superior. After that, I worked briefly as a tutor counselor for high school kids. My boss said I was good at relating to the students' emotional problems, which made sense because we were nearly the same age. I made some money, which I never ended up spending, and then I came back to Pittsburgh, and my friend died. So I pulled out that first chapter of a novel and got to work. I installed a shelf in my closet that fit just my laptop, and left enough room for a little green chair. I shut myself in there and I wrote. Soon I had 40 pages, then 50, then 40. Then I would get too busy with school. Next semester I arranged an independent study with a professor so I could work on my book. The professor was a kind of weirdo who taught Shakespeare and had sometimes been seen drinking whiskey at 11 a.m. in the alley behind my house. Why do you want to do an independent study with me? I don't know anything about writing, he said, in an articulate monotone. Because you're the only one that would do it, I said. We sat in an office only a couple of times larger than my closet. He put his lips together and nodded. That's fair. So I got to write. When I had started the story, the main character had the same name as me, Jonathan Saffron Forrester. But around this time, I realized the character wasn't me anymore. Maybe I had changed, or maybe he had. But either way, he called for a revision. I made him Colin, the same character as my screenplay. He had the same temperament, but dealt with different circumstances. And I can't say for sure I would have picked him if I knew what I would end up doing to him. 50, 60, 90 pages, then 40, then 20. But I swear these are really good. And then 45. Maybe they weren't so good. Every time I got distracted by school, I'd lose grip on my book, rewriting the beginning over and over again. Being busy was a problem. But there was something else holding me back. I couldn't figure out what it was until I found myself with a terrible writing professor and finally got it. It was a summer class, the last prereq until I could get into senior seminar, the really juicy stuff. The only undergrad class that actually makes sense. But for now, I stuck with this woman. At that point in time, I actually understood plot. I could handle scene and character with enough finesse to churn out short stories that would make you shrug and say A or B because of the spelling. So, all the real work I had to do for this class was to show up, sit quietly. But my writer's ego, large as it had become by now, has had trouble keeping its mouth shut during class. And I especially had trouble sitting on my hands when the teacher said, in passing, that she didn't really write anymore. So I Google searched her, and she had an MFA but hadn't published anything, at least not that I could find. She sold hand-knitted scarves online, which was her main pastime. Now knitting is fine and good, really is, but a professional knitter shouldn't have been telling kids who were honestly trying to write what did or didn't work based on how she felt that particular day. Though she never seemed to criticize my writing, I found myself indirectly defending other students by bringing up examples of writers who did what they had just been told they could not do. Of course, her response was the one I had heard before. Joyce Carol Oates can do whatever she wants. You are no Poe. You are no Don DeLillo. You are no Pynchon. Hemingway can get away with this kind of thing, but, in effect, she said, you are not any of these people, so you must be nobody. I knew this was bullshit, but at the same time I realized this way of thinking had already made a mark on me. The reason I was never satisfied with my book was partially because I wasn't writing the kind of book that I would like. It was too conservative, too literary. I was writing the way I was trained to, like a nobody. But I was somebody. In fact, I was more than somebody. I was Danny fucking Mac. I just needed to figure out what that meant. And that's when my book started getting weirder. I think that's where I'm going to stop. Thank you very much. I am Danny fucking Mac. I am on a reading tour with my buddy Elwin Cotman, author of Jack Daniels Sessions EP, his first book. That's what we're mostly